Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, that speaker talked about the need to be fiscally responsible, which, as my colleague David Parker said, is something that is agreed to in this House. And you'd have to say, reading this sort of lightweight stuff in here, the sort of government needs its own wee guidebook to be fair, to be equitable, to take account of future generations and its expenditure, to formulate a fiscal strategy with regard to the impact on future generations, to ensure the government's Crown's resources are managed effectively and efficiently. They need a wee guidebook, apparently, to ensure that they adhere to basic fiscal principles. We over here don't need a guidebook. It's sort of in our DNA. It's how we were brought up. But the member, Mr Goldsmith, apparently, who has a monopoly on representing the working class all the way from Parnell and Epsom, the man who was John Banks's biographer, who apparently has a monopoly on representing the working class, I just make this point to him. Is it responsible? Is it fiscally responsible? Was that billiard ball? Is it fiscally responsible, sir, for a government to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars a week to put in place a tax cut where the top 10% get 40% of that tax cut and the bottom 20% get 2% of it? I just put that question. Is that fiscally responsible? Is that within the parameters of this political pamphlet full of piffle in here? Is that fiscally responsible? Now, I would argue, maybe it comes under fairness, Mr Clark, my colleague says. I think he's tongue-in-cheek, I know he is. But that doesn't sound fiscally responsible to me, to borrow hundreds at its peak, I think, $300 million plus per week, and they talk about borrowing. Now, they say we were fiscally irresponsible. Well, for the genius from the Waikato over there, what he forgets, of course, is what he did inherit as a government from us was net Crown debt at zero. Net Crown debt at zero. The recession, I mean, maybe Mr Bennett lives in a very, very myopic little world and doesn't realise there's something called globalisation and an international fiscal crisis. Maybe he thinks New Zealand initiated the whole global collapse, you know, in his own little world out the back in the bush, out in the Waikato. But the deal is that these people, this government inherited 9 years of surpluses, and net Crown debt at zero. And as I've said previously in this House, I remember as Associate Minister of Finance being pilloried along with Michael Cullen by one Bill English, Shadow Finance Minister. And I never thought in the history of my time in politics or reading about it as a kid, I'd have a national government attacking a Labor government for being too tight and not spending a lot. Exactly. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd ever hear that from this crew over here. But what they wanted was spend a lot. They said we were mean. Remember the block of cheese government? Mean, awful Labor government who wouldn't go and tax and spend and borrow and hope. Exactly what these geniuses over here have done for the last 5 years. Borrowed, given a tax cut to their mates, propped up by every other, sort of 80% of people who've got to prop up their mates to pay for it, borrowing $300 million a week. So I just asked them, is that responsible? Mr Bennett was interjecting about debt. I say to Mr Bennett, happy for him to get up and have a crack, is borrowing $300 million a week fiscally responsible? Oh, hang on. The boy from the Waikato suddenly silent. Lost his tongue. Oh, yes. The second thing I'd say in terms of fiscal responsibility, because this is some sort of National Party Bible, they need an instruction book as to how to be told to be fiscally responsible, is this selling assets where today we hear Meridian, $140 million worth of divvies, not going to 4.4 million people, going to those shareholders who had a lot of money who could afford it. Is that fiscally responsible? We also know that the money raised from the Mighty River Power deal, money's not going into hospitals and schools. Money's going into advice to the Prime Minister's Department on risk management. I suppose there is some value in resourcing the Prime Minister's Department given its recent track record on risk management, but that ain't a school or a hospital or a road or a bridge last time I checked. Money, of course, millions of dollars going into free shares to pay for the free shares, the giveaway, the bribe to people in the Mighty River Power deal, the incentive scheme. Where was that paid for? Out of the Future Investment Fund, we know, because those figures are in Mr English's budget. Is that fiscally responsible? We now have the Meridian share deal, which is not sort of, you know, you get a free lot of shares. It's buy now, pay later, next stop, set of steak knives, whatever it takes to get it off the deck. Is that fiscally responsible? Is it fiscally responsible to have hundreds of millions of dollars flowing into the pockets of those who live in New York and London and Tokyo and Zurich and other places, rather than being ploughed into the infrastructure which they say, and we agree with them, this country so desperately needs, in respect of hospitals and schools and roadways and transportation, all those good things? Is that fiscally responsible? Because maybe they should actually take this away and rewrite it, because they talk a lot, and Mr Goldsmith got found out, of course, by Mr Parker over superannuation. A lion in this chamber saying nothing needs to be done in terms of securing national superannuation for future generations. How do you secure it? You've got to reform it. You've got to make it sustainable. But I'll put him up, as my colleague Marion Street says, before an audience. Oh, what does he say? Yes, it'll have to be reformed, but that's for another government. That's for another government at another time. Another government. So what he's really saying, and what Mr Hayes, of course, signed up to, is they know it has to be done. They know their grandkids and their great-grandkids deserve, here he is now, deserve a superannuation, should be entitled to and should get national superannuation. And I don't buy the argument that many of my generation have, which is there'll be nothing left for us because, you know, it's just the way it is. No, there should be for my generation and generations beyond. But the way you secure that is to tell people the truth, to bite the bullet, to put in the transitional provisions for people, you know, the building site person whose knees have gone, Mr Hayes' knees have gone for other reasons, we won't go there, whose knees have gone, so that they can actually progress and perhaps retire a little early because the body's given up. But the way to actually secure that is to be truthful with people and say that people of my age, 43, may have to work a bit longer, and we will, to provide for others. But Mr Goldsmith, a lion in this chamber, but says it'll be up to a future government. It'll be up to a future government. So what that tells us is this simply is political propaganda. This is just designed to tell people whatever they want to hear, and then when these guys slither out of this place in the next election, slither out over to this side of the House, then it'll be up to, as it always is, to a Labor government to fix it. To be fiscally responsible, as we did with the Cullen Fund. To be fiscally responsible, as we did with KiwiSaver. All of which they said, the National Party railed against, said was communism, said they'd repeal, and what have they done? Nothing. And we hear record profitability for the Cullen Fund. It should be officially named that, I reckon, for the Cullen Fund today. But that is called fiscal responsibility. That is called not just talking about providing for future generations and assessing the impact of government policy in line with its impact on future generations. We don't need a guidebook, you know, 101 to be responsible for dummies. You know, we don't need that because we did it. We didn't need anybody to tell us. We set up superannuation mechanisms, KiwiSaver, the Cullen Fund, because we knew that would have a positive effect on future generations. And the man from Waikato was opposed to it. And the man from Waikato, I believe, in one of his elections, Ian, went round and campaigned against it. Oh, bet he wouldn't do that next time. Yeah. Bet he wouldn't go on the stump in the Waikato and say, I'm going to repeal the Cullen Fund and I'm going to ditch KiwiSaver. Oh, he won't say that this time because he knows people understand it. That's called fiscal responsibility. We don't need half a dozen pages of drivel. And the best argument they can come up is because the Labor Party is not supporting a bill because it's piffle, means that we don't believe in it. Well, we don't need somebody to write down that you've got to look after future generations. We don't need a clause in here that says you must formulate revenue strategy having regard to efficiency and fairness, including the predictability and stability of tax rates. Because we didn't set up a tax regime where the top 10% got 40% and the bottom 20% got 2%. We didn't do that. We didn't need anybody to define what fairness was for us, to tell us, to give us a definition. We knew, because unlike them, it's in our DNA. It's what we were brought up with. It is our value base. It is in our DNA. I don't know what is in Mr Goldsmith's DNA, I hate to think, but we don't need a guidebook, sir. This is a political pamphlet. This is piffle, and it is a waste of taxpayers' money, and it's irresponsible that we're spending taxpayers' money and time debating this tripe.
Call Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of the